I told you to handle this, Michael. We cannot afford these delays.
I am trying, but my father is being difficult about the access road.
When my son's wife sent me a photo of their half-finished dream home with a text saying, "We did it without you," I knew it was time for the reveal. That house was worthless. They had no idea they built a $1 million structure that was, functionally, just a colossal, overpriced septic tank. My name is Earl, 69, a retired utility and civil engineer. I know the blueprints of this county better than anyone knows their own reflection. A few years ago, I gave my son Michael and his new wife Catherine a generous start. I sold him 5 prime acres for a token $10,000. It was a gift, pure and simple. However, the deed contained a crucial, legally ironclad detail. A narrow, 10-foot strip of land along the rear boundary remained in my sole, absolute ownership.
This wasn't an access easement. It was my property, because the main city gravity-fed sewer line ran directly beneath it. This strip was my strategic endgame. Catherine despised me. She saw my knowledge as control and systematically cut me out of Michael's life. When they planned their dream home, she insisted it be secretive. They hired outside contractors, deliberately ignoring the expertise that could have saved them everything. If you are enjoying this story about how a little-known property law can lead to a massive revenge plot, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the shocking final chapters where the stakes get even higher. The moment Michael called, clearly reading Catherine's script, to say they didn't need my quote for the build, the line was drawn. I didn't warn them. I had seen their site plan, a high plateau, the absolute worst spot on the property. As an engineer, I instantly recognized the disaster. To connect their home to the municipal sewer line, they had only one logical, gravity-fed path, straight down the gentle rear slope, right through the 10 feet of land that was still legally mine. Any other solution meant a prohibitively expensive sewage pump station. I began my daily surveillance. I watched the foundation go in, then the massive wooden frame. I saw them pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into an irreversible structure. They wanted to shut me out? I would let them sink every dime they had. The financial pain would be the measure of their arrogance. I waited for the trap to spring. My revenge wasn't born of simple anger. It was forged by genuine disrespect. My son Michael and I had a solid bond until Catherine arrived. She moved in like a cold front, determined to isolate him from his past and from me. Catherine was modern, sleek, and utterly dismissive of my 40 years of engineering experience. She saw me as an old man trying to micromanage their lives. Her contempt wasn't subtle. The critical moment came at a family dinner, when I offered advice about where to place a well for the best water pressure, a small piece of free, expert counsel. Catherine laughed sharply. "Earl," she sneered, "we're hiring professionals. We don't need the archaic wisdom of a surveyor. We are building a smart home, not a shack." Michael just looked down, silent. That silence confirmed my new path. He had chosen her disdain. Catherine's strategy was to weaponize Michael's independence. Every decision, especially the house construction, became a testament to their freedom from me. She convinced him to build in total secrecy and, crucially, to ignore the original survey maps. They relied only on vague developer plot lines and generic contractor advice. They actively avoided the documents I had meticulously drawn, which clearly marked my 10-foot strip as a separate, critical parcel. This willful ignorance was the foundation of my strategy. I knew they were rushing, driven by Catherine's impatience to prove she could win. She wanted a quick move-in to cement her victory over the family history she detested. Every day I drove past the site, watching the foundation pour and the framing rise. I felt a grim satisfaction. I could have stopped them instantly by pointing out the deed, but they chose disrespect and secrecy. They had to learn that in engineering and property law, gravity and legal documents always override arrogance. I needed the cost of their mistake to be devastating and irreversible. I waited for them to empty their bank accounts. The secret construction was Catherine's way of asserting control. She ensured their project manager treated the lot generically, ignoring the crucial topography and the unique legal deed. My old contacts at the county confirmed my suspicions. Michael and Catherine were proceeding based on superficial site maps and pure arrogance, skipping the deep utility check. The official, brutal communication arrived 3 months in. Michael called, his voice flat and detached, like reading a prepared statement. "Dad, we are breaking ground next week," he announced. "Catherine and I want this to be ours. We aren't having a big event, and we certainly don't need any oversight. No visits. Just let us handle it." It was a clear eviction notice from my son's life, driven by his wife's spite. The sting was immediate. They had shut the door on me, choosing total exclusion. I kept my voice calm, hiding the seismic shift in my plans. "I understand, Michael. It's your future. Just make sure your contractor triple-checks the utility hookups. That land is tricky." His hurried, "Everything's handled," was confirmation. He hadn't checked the critical details. He assumed a standard builder would manage the unique specifics of my deed. I knew their exact building site, the high plateau. It offered a beautiful view, but in engineering terms, it was the worst possible spot. They were 400 feet from the main city sewer line, which ran beneath my 10-foot strip. This distance and elevation were the key to the trap. The city sewer system relies entirely on gravity. Building on the highest point meant that a proper connection would require either prohibitively expensive deep trenching or installing a complex, high-maintenance sewage pump station they couldn't afford. The only logical, simple, and cheap path for a gravity-fed connection was a shallow trench running down the rear slope, straight across the 10 feet of land that was still legally mine. That 10-foot strip was now the most valuable, most vital piece of land for their survival. They were sinking their entire future into a massive structure that was physically and legally cut off from its essential utility. I drove past daily, watching the concrete pour and the frame rise, calculating the mounting financial devastation. I was waiting for the cost of their arrogance to become total ruin. I didn't need to trespass. The evidence of their error was clear from the street. Their contractors were prioritizing aesthetics and the view over engineering fundamentals. In construction, the crucial connections are power, water, and, most critically, sewage out. The sewer line was the silent weapon. Every morning, I drove my long route to get a panoramic view of the site. It was a grim process, watching them meticulously build their financial coffin. The foundation was flawless, a testament to the builder's skill, but a monument to Michael and Catherine's arrogance. I observed the preliminary trenches. They were shallow and temporary, but they revealed the builder's intent. Drainage was being planned down the gentle rear slope, away from the road. This was the only gravity-fed solution, and it led them straight to the 10-foot boundary strip. This was the fatal oversight. The contractors assumed the strip was a standard easement, a guaranteed right-of-way for utilities. They never pulled the deep legal history confirming that the strip was a separate, wholly owned parcel, legally mine. They saw a clear slope and assumed accessibility. I calculated the financial exposure daily. The foundation, the expensive lumber, the rapidly rising framework. They were spending hundreds of thousands, emptying savings, and incurring massive debt for a luxury custom build. Every day, the price of my revenge climbed exponentially. The doubt was heavy. I was watching my only son make a ruinous mistake, driven by his spiteful wife. I often had my phone ready to call him, but then I remembered Catherine's cold sneer and Michael's silence. They chose this exclusion. They chose to build on my humiliation. If I warned them now, they would suffer a minor cost adjustment, and I would forever be the controlling old man. No, the lesson had to be absolute. They needed to understand the true cost of disrespecting professional expertise. I decided I would wait until the framing was fully complete, the roof was on, and the interior work was about to begin. That was the point of no financial return. When the cost of fixing the mistake exceeded their entire financial security, the trap would spring. I just needed Catherine's final, triumphant message to trigger the final act. 3 more weeks passed, and the build accelerated into high gear. This wasn't just construction. It was a furious, expensive race against time, clearly fueled by Catherine's relentless demand for immediate, visible results. I watched their vision taking shape, a large, modern, multi-gabled house. This was not a cheap starter home. This was the foundation of a $500,000 property, minimum, once finished. The moment the roof trusses were lifted and the decking began was critical. In construction, that moment signifies the true end of the framing phase, the irreversible point where the structure becomes a true house, and the costs become truly insurmountable. Their commitment was complete. I knew, thanks to my contacts, that Michael had drawn down the largest portion of his construction loan, and had certainly emptied his personal savings to cover initial non-loan expenses like site grading, permits, and preliminary utility fees for services they still couldn't connect to. My calculations showed they were easily over $200,000 invested now. Foundation, framing, roofing materials, and labor. To tear it down, move the site, and start over would cost more than they had left to finish it. They were financially trapped, completely exposed. The contractors, unaware of the impending disaster, started running preliminary interior wiring and moved on to the plumbing rough-in. This plumbing phase was the final, critical step before the confrontation. Plumbing requires a final, approved tie-in plan for the city sewer system. They were nearing the point of requesting the final underground inspection from the county. The clock was ticking down to 0 on their ignorance. I began preparing my own official documents. I retrieved the original 1995 survey, the 2003 subdivision filing, and the notarized deed I had signed with Michael. All documents clearly showed the 10-foot strip as Parcel 1B, explicitly owned by Earl Thompson. My title was unassailable. The paperwork was clean. I had built the perfect legal financial checkmate. I just needed the final, arrogant push from Catherine to signal her triumphant victory. That trigger would open the trap. I didn't have to wait long for the catalyst. Catherine, incapable of quiet satisfaction, needed to rub her perceived victory in my face. It happened the afternoon the roofing crew finished shingling the main gables, making the house look almost complete. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was a group message from Catherine, directed primarily at me. It included a high-resolution photograph of the imposing, finished wooden shell. The text was perfectly calculated for maximum spite. Quote, 10. The message was a stinging humiliation, mocking my title and my strategic property ownership. But for me, it was the official, quote, 11 button. Her smug confidence confirmed her total ignorance of the trap she had built. The money was spent. The structure was irreversible. The next unavoidable step for them was the finalization of the utility plans and the crucial tie-in permit. They had to submit the exact location of their sewer connection to the county. That simple bureaucratic step was the lock on the trap door. I immediately contacted my close friend Dan, At the county planning office. Our conversation was short and professional. I said, Dan agreed immediately. A simple, polite on-the-permit request. Nothing illegal, just an old engineer ensuring the county's paperwork was accurate. I knew this flag would trigger an automatic, immediate, and utterly devastating site inspection when they tried to get their plumbing signed off. The final countdown to their moment of realization had begun. The administrative delay I initiated took effect almost immediately. Within a week of Catherine's taunting message, the construction progress ground to a strange, total halt. Michael and Catherine were oblivious, likely blaming the county's bureaucracy. But the contractor, Gary, knew better. Gary was desperate. He needed the final underground inspection approval to proceed with backfilling and closing up the internal walls. The county planning office, following Dan's instruction, told him the utility tie-in permit was due to the subdivision's unique history. Under immense pressure from his impatient clients, Gary sent his crew to physically confirm the connection point. They dug exploratory test pits along the rear boundary, following the only sensible gravity-fed path, the path leading straight to my 10-foot strip. What they found confirmed my planning. The sewer main was precisely where I put it years ago. However, the elevation required them to start their connection on the adjacent property, my strip, to achieve the necessary downward slope without installing a costly and complex lift station. The house was simply built too high and too far back to connect anywhere else easily. Michael and Catherine were still busy choosing expensive fixtures and convinced the delay was a simple paperwork snag. Gary, on the other hand, was now in full panic. A lift station meant an unplanned $30,000 to $40,000 expense, a disastrous cost overrun that would certainly destroy his relationship with Catherine. He was determined to use the cheap gravity path. Gary, desperate, finally went to the county records office and pulled the original subdivision filing. This was the moment of his realization. The documents were clear. Parcel 1B, the crucial 10-foot utility strip, was not a common public easement. It was explicitly listed under the sole ownership of Earl Thompson. The house was literally 10 feet away from being habitable, and that 10 feet was owned by the man they had scorned. Gary immediately stopped all work and called Michael. The administrative delay had now escalated into a full-scale, catastrophic emergency. The phone rang at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. It was Michael. His tone was not just stressed, it was raw, uncontrolled panic, bordering on accusation. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" he shouted, without preamble. "Gary says the county won't sign off because the sewer connection crosses some boundary. What is this boundary review? You have to fix this." I let his distress hang in the air. He was calling the man he deliberately shut out to fix a catastrophe caused by his own choices. "Michael," I said, my voice measured and calm. "Lower your voice. What exactly did Gary tell you?" He sputtered, barely coherent. "He says we can't connect the house unless we run the pipe across parcel 1B. He says that parcel is yours. That's the easement. You sold me the land." This was the first official moment of truth. My resolve hardened. "You bought parcel 1A, Michael. The deed you signed clearly states that parcel 1B, the 10-foot utility strip, remained in my full, separate ownership. It was never an easement, son. I told you it was my pension investment years ago." His voice cracked. "You knew we were building there. Why didn't you say anything?" "You and Catherine told me you wanted to do this without my suggestions and without my interference, Michael," I reminded him gently. "You made a very expensive choice to exclude 4 decades of professional expertise. I respected your request. If I had stopped you on day 1, you would have learned nothing. Now, the lesson is clear." The line fell silent as Catherine screamed something muffled in the background. "What do we do?" Michael finally whispered, defeated. "You have two options," I stated, setting the trap. Option 1. Install that complex, costly $40,000 lift station, which you will forever maintain. Option 2. We talk about Parcel 1B, but my asking price just went up significantly. Michael arrived at my house 2 hours later. He looked haggard, unshaven, and utterly broken. Catherine was not with him, a key detail that told me he finally understood the gravity of the situation, and, perhaps, the source of the real problem. He sat at my kitchen table, not defiant, but utterly defeated. "Dad," he started, his voice barely a rasp, "we are ruined. We put every dime we had into that frame. We leveraged the rest with the bank. If we can't get an occupancy permit, the bank will seize the land. The house is worthless without the sewer tie-in. Name your price for the 10 feet. We will find a way." I slid the original deed across the table. I wasn't interested in a simple property sale. I was interested in saving my son from a disastrous marriage built on spite, I said, meeting his eyes. I explained the calculation slowly, professionally. I stated. Michael's eyes widened. I replied, the truth finally coming out. I leaned forward. Michael stared at me, his face pale. I corrected him. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Michael buried his head in his hands, finally facing the depth of his wife's betrayal and the painful truth of my calculated move. The decision was devastating, but clear. He had to save his financial future. He had to save himself. "She ruined me, didn't she?" he whispered. "She did this on purpose." I simply nodded. The power was now entirely in his hands. Michael finally looked up from the table, his eyes red but clear. The defeat was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He realized that my ultimatum wasn't a punishment. It was a rescue mission, disguised as revenge. Catherine's spite had cost him everything, and I was the only one offering him a way out, albeit a brutally painful one. He said quietly. I added simply. He nodded, a single, devastating acknowledgement. And just like that, the revenge plot was complete, achieving its true, higher goal, severing the toxic influence that was destroying my son. I immediately contacted my attorney and transferred the deed for Parcel 1B, ensuring Michael had the absolute, unassailable right to connect his sewer line. 2 days later, Michael came back with confirmation. The divorce papers had been filed. It was messy, swift, and catastrophic for Catherine. She tried to fight him on every front, including claiming the house. But my clean, meticulous paperwork, Parcel 1B being the key, made the house unfinishable under her ownership without my help. The contractors, now with the legal documentation they needed, quickly ran the gravity-fed sewer line across the now transferred strip of land. Within a month, the county signed off on the utilities. The house was eventually finished, not by Catherine's expensive tastes, but by Michael and me working side by side, much like we used to. He learned the value of a survey map, the unforgiving nature of a deed, and the true cost of disrespect. He got the house he dreamed of, but more importantly, he got his life and his father back. I wasn't just left financially stable, I was renewed. I sold Michael the 10-foot strip, but the $220,000 I gave him back was reinvested into his future, not my own pocket. My real pension came from seeing my son finally standing on his own 2 feet, free of Catherine's poison. We spend weekends working on the landscaping now, and he never makes a move without asking for my, quote, input. So, I turn this story over to you. I watched my son and his wife spend every dime they had on a structure designed to hurt me, and I waited until the only way out was for him to choose between his financial future and his toxic wife. Did I go too far? Was this the only way to save my son from complete ruin? What would you have done in my place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to hear more brutal stories of pro-revenge, property wars, and family drama, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next upload. The end. Thank you for listening.